History marches right before our eyes. Protesters have been fighting for their freedom in Egypt for weeks, and tonight it appears they've won. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has finally stepped down as thousands and thousands and thousands of joyful Egyptians celebrate in Tahrir Square. Look at that. Now what happens? Now where do they go? And what does this mean for the United States? Joining me now, Cato Institute foreign policy analyst and expert on Egypt, Malou Innocent. You know you're going to have to start staying in New York because we keep bringing you up from Washington, D.C. Thank you for coming here.
Absolutely.
At this critical moment in the history of Egypt. So, first question, did you expect a few days ago that we would see President Mubarak's resignation?
Honestly, I did not. He is a dictator, and by definition, they want to hold on to power. They have no incentive to relinquish power. And really what we've seen here is President Mubarak hand off a lot of the powers to his military council and to Vice President Omar Suleiman, who is the head of the CIA's rendition program. He was a former head of intelligence. He's indicated on a number of occasions that he really does not want to see substantial reform. So it'll take time to see whether we'll see fundamental changes, but this is a very momentous occasion.
Would I be out of line if I were to say that Suleiman and the generals around him are as much monsters from the point of view of human liberty as President Mubarak was?
Absolutely. In fact, there are allegations that Suleiman personally was behind the torture. He actually tortured people personally, the enemy combatants. So when we talk about the oppressive apparatus of the police state within Egypt, almost everyone from Suleiman on down really does have blood on their hands.
All right. Well, how did this come about? I mean, did somebody from the military say, Mr. President, we can't support you anymore because either we have to kill these people in the streets or we have to let them drive you from office and we don't want to kill them? Even though we work for you, we're telling you we can't do what you want us to do? Is that the way it happens?
Well, I think this is interesting. I think that the military really does have a stake in the status quo. They have a stake in the Mubarak regime, not necessarily Mubarak himself. The regime, the structure, the sort of incentives that they have to keep stability intact overrode the loyalties that they had to Mubarak. And that being said, they really do want to see the status quo remain in place. And so I don't think we'll see too many fundamental shifts within the existing power structure. And that's actually unfortunate for many of the protesters who do want to see actual substantive changes.
All right. Will the military regime facilitate free and open elections? Not elections where this party's permitted to run and those four parties are not, which is the way it is now, or was up to today. Will the military, in your view, facilitate free and open democratic, lowercase d, elections this September?
It's too early to tell. It's too early. I honestly think it's more of we're actually, just like the President Obama just said, we're on the path of an orderly and genuine transition to a process that may or may not lead to free and fair elections. So it's very much open to debate.
What happens? Palestinians elected Hamas. What happens if the Egyptians elect the Muslim Brotherhood? What happens if it's a free and fair election and people get in that hate America, hate freedom, hate Israel?
Well, I don't think anyone's under any illusion that democracy will flourish tomorrow. There are certain instruments of a functioning democracy that Egypt still does not have. It doesn't have a robust free press. It doesn't have an independent judiciary. It doesn't have a representative parliament. So really, a lot of these mechanisms will have to grow over time. And that being said, when we look at sort of the radical movements, I think we have a tendency to sort of over-exaggerate and really adopt the rhetoric that Mubarak is adopting. He's been in power for over 30 years, and he's actually said the reason why I'm in power is because the Islamists will assume control. But if we adopt that rhetoric, we must understand that we radically over-exaggerate the power of the Muslim Brotherhood. We have about 100,000 adherents within a population of 80 million people.
Last question. We only have about 30 seconds. Will the crowds accept the fact that Suleiman is the vice president, the generals are running this, or do they want the whole ruling cast out?
I think the critical thing that protesters want is an end to the emergency law that allows the government to detain people without trial. They want an end to the oppressive state regime. And again,
I don't think we're going to see an end to that tomorrow.
Exactly.
Or this weekend.
Exactly. And luckily, I think right now we haven't seen protesters be angry at the United States. We haven't seen Obama being burned in effigy. So this is really a good
Malou Innocent, it's a pleasure. Again, thanks for joining us. From revolution in the streets of Egypt to revolution here at home, the brewing battle in the Republican Party. Next. From revolution in Egypt to a brewing revolution here at home, Tea Party Republicans took the House of Representatives by storm last November with a mission to put the government back into its constitutionally defined place. Americans have had it with a government that spends and borrows us into oblivion, watches us in secret, and wants to control our every personal private decision. This is what the voters wanted in November. This is what the Tea Party is all about. With us now, the leader of the Tea Party caucus in the House of Representatives, Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who joins us from the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington, D.C. Congresswoman Bachmann, welcome here. It must be a very exciting place, as you've learned, as we've learned. The President Hosni Mubarak has stepped down. Question, did the Obama administration handle this correctly by cheering the crowds on, or did they end up antagonizing the crowds and our allies in the Middle East as well?
Well, as you know, that there's incredible instability going on in the Middle East, not only with Egypt, but with other nations, Jordan, with Yemen, with Tunisia. We don't know all the volatilities that are involved right now. I do now sit on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and I am privy to the top secret information now with our nation. I've been in briefings today. I've been in briefings all day yesterday. And because of the sensitive nature of the position that I'm in, I am not able to comment on issues that are now in the public, either to confirm or deny, and it would be improper for me to comment on that.
All right. We know it wouldn't be improper for you to comment on budgetary and spending issues. The House Republican leadership originally wanted to cut $38 billion from the president's budget. I think the Tea Party folks have moved that number up to $100 billion. You can tell us in a minute.
Oh, yes.
Our mutual friend, Senator Rand Paul in the Senate, has that number up to $500 billion. Where's it going to end up?
Well, probably not $500 billion. I'd also put over, I think, $430 billion worth of proposed cuts for us to discuss. I think that's really what the discussion should be right now. How many cuts can we put in our budget? Let's not forget what we're working off of, a $3.5 trillion budget. Certainly we can do better than $30-some billion that we can cut out of a budget of that size. Understanding, of course, that a large portion of that budget is taken up in entitlement programs that are in cement that we will have to look at reforming going down the road. But we do need to focus our discussion clearly on what we can cut. And I think that the people who are newly elected to this Congress have spoken with a very unified voice, Judge, and that's we need to bump the number up higher, not lower.
All right. Was there actually, or is there actually a division amongst Republicans in the House between the old guard that didn't want that number to be above $100 billion and the more fiscally conservative, faithful to the Constitution, generally younger members of the Tea Party caucus like you, Congresswoman Bachmann, who basically said to the Republican leadership, we will sink the party if we don't do what we were sent here to do. This budget has to be cut, and it has to be cut deeply and seriously.
Well, as you know, people who come into Congress fresh, they have a very wonderful street perspective of being with people all the time on the campaign trail. And what they heard more than anything from people is you go to Washington and you cut that out of control budget. That voice has been so loud, so clear that leadership cannot ignore that voice. And so I think leadership wants to work with all of the new people coming into Congress, these great men and women who believe in budgets that get closer to balancing. And I think they want to achieve that end now of being able to cut closer now. Hopefully it will be $100 billion. I'd like to see more. But at least $100 billion out of this budget.
Congresswoman Bachmann, should the government be able to hack into our computer accounts without a search warrant?
Well, this is an issue. Are you talking about now the vote that we took this week that failed?
Yes, I am. I'm talking about the extension of the Patriot Act, which permits federal agents to do that, even though you, as a constitutional scholar, know, as do I, that the Constitution requires search warrants before agents can do that.
Yes, it does. It does require warrants, and there were two provisions from the current Patriot Act that we voted on. One is the roving wiretaps, and that deals with the change in technology. Today, a lot of people who are alleged terrorists are using cell phones, they're using iPads. It isn't the traditional phone that's plugged into the wall anymore. And so if a terrorist moves from their iPad to their cell phone, we want to be able to have that flexibility built in. But it's also important for people people to remember that permission is given ahead of time to go after that particular individual. They may use a different cell phone, but it's the same individual. And we have either the head of one of the intelligence networks or the director of the FBI or the deputy director that has to sign off on that
But
warrant
not a federal judge, as the
can be
Constitution requires.
Well, and I think this is an area, that's why we want to pay closer attention. As
Good.
you know, the Patriot Act was set, these provisions were set to expire on the 28th of February. So we're coming up against a wall now on whether or not we're going to extend these provisions. Another provision came out of another Intel bill that was passed in 2004 that was also part of what we were voting on, dealing with the lone wolf issue.
Got it.
The fact that we aren't fighting necessarily standing armies now, but just lone actors that are potentially jihadi extremists.
You got a great crowd behind you that's waiting for you. Give them hell. Thanks for joining us, Congresswoman.
Thank you. We'll see you in D.C.
You got it. And now a few items from our Freedom File at the Central Intelligence Agency. Guess what happens when you unlawfully arrest the wrong person? You get a promotion. At the behest of a CIA analyst, a German national disappeared for months into U.S. custody, all in the name of the war on terror. Turns out the CIA arrested the wrong person. Let's put aside that the CIA has no authority, moral or legal, to arrest German citizens on a whim. What's truly unthinkable is the fact that the CIA analyst responsible for this botched arrest was not punished. In fact, she became a prominent figure in the CIA's counterterrorism center. Are you kidding me? Only in the government can you break the law and get promoted. Vice President Joe Biden proposed the Fed spend $53 billion borrowed or printed dollars on high-speed trains. And while the idea of a high-speed travel, high-speed trains may seem glamorous and efficient, Vice President Biden fails to highlight the unintended consequences of high-speed rail, that people would be kicked out of their homes because of something called eminent domain. This principle of law permits the government to kick people out of their homes if it wants to use their property to build railroad ties. It assumes that when the government desires something, its desires trump your property rights. Well, train tracks require a lot of land, and if these trains get built, it will no doubt mean countless uses of eminent domain, causing people to get kicked to the curb, left and right. This one you won't believe. At the Super Bowl last weekend, the United States government spent an estimated $450,000 to have 5 F-18 Hornets travel from Virginia Beach, Virginia, to Arlington, Texas, just to perform a flyover over Cowboy Stadium. Now, what's curious is this. There were F-18s stationed nearby in Texas. And what's even more ridiculous is that the stadium's dome roof was closed due to the cold. So the government burned $500,000 of your tax dollars to fly planes from Virginia to Texas over a sporting event to a venue, and no one actually saw it. Remember, America? This is the same government that wants to run health care. Coming up, the legendary Stuart Varney and what the upheaval in Egypt means for Americans, for Fannie Mae, for Freddie Mac, and for you. Next.